Less than 24 hours after his speech, Dr. King was dead. Today, as chair of the Virginia Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Memorial Commission, I join the world in not just commemorating his death, but in celebrating his life and legacy. We must connect Dr. King's legacy to our work today. This afternoon, as it does every year, the National Civil Rights Museum will commemorate Dr. King's life and legacy on the spot where he last stood on what was the balcony of room 306 of Lorraine Motel. On this 54th anniversary, they will honor him by addressing the perpetual question, which he spent the final year of his life pondering: where do we go from here? That was the title of his final book and the speech he gave 9 months before his death at the 11th Annual Southern Christian Leadership Conference in Atlanta. One of the central themes was hope. Reflecting upon the civil rights movement, Dr. King discussed the question of what African Americans should do with the new freedoms found in such laws as the Civil Rights Act and the Voting Rights Act. He concluded that all Americans must unite in order to fight poverty and create an equality of opportunity. He reiterated his philosophy of nonviolent social change and the power of love over hate, saying that he still stood by nonviolence as the most potent weapon available in the struggle for justice in this country, because darkness cannot put out darkness. Only light can do that. This year, the question of where do we go from here seems more difficult to answer than ever before in my lifetime. Hope at times feels hard to hold on to. The hate that Dr. King saw has not gone away. It alternates between festering below the surface and bursting forth in the open. The tensions have only been heightened during the global pandemic. The past 2 years have been marked by fatigue, anxiety, grief, and anger, which sometimes, frankly, threatens to overwhelm the progress that we have made. And while we have made great strides in addressing racial injustice and inequity, we are now facing the same backlash to that progress that my great-grandparents' generation faced in response to the political, social, and economic gains they made and that formerly enslaved Americans made during Reconstruction. That same backlash that Dr. King and my parents' generation faced in response to Brown versus Board of Education, the Civil Rights Act, and the Voting Rights Act. And as more and more of those who endured Jim Crow are dying, we face a backlash to teaching their experiences to our children. We see the labeling of efforts to redress the impact of slavery and Jim Crow as inherently divisive concepts or critical race theory. But to answer the question, where do we go from here, we have to fully acknowledge and understand how our past brought us here, which can only be done by teaching a full, accurate, and complete history, the good, the bad, and the ugly, even when, and I would say especially when, it is uncomfortable. More than a year after the insurrection at the Capitol, our rifts have not been bridged, and there are those who seek to undermine the very democracy we live in, while those in the Ukraine are willing to give their lives to maintain their own. As we are on the verge of confirming Judge Ketanji Brown Jackson as the first African-American woman to the U.S. Supreme Court, my heart is broken over some of the vitriolic rhetoric I've heard against her. Families are grieving loved ones that they've lost to the pandemic and to gun violence. Where do we find the momentum to move forward and the energy to ask, where do we go from here, when at times it feels like we are barely treading water in the present? But we must continue to answer that question with a strong, demanding love, and with hard work to build and strengthen our communities. As we reflect on the life and legacy of Dr. King, we must hold on to his unshakable faith, as outlined in his final speech, that whatever challenges we face, We will achieve peace and justice in our future if we continue to strive for it together. I've been to the mountaintop, and I've looked over, and I've seen the promised land, she said. I may not get there with you, but I want you to know that we as a people will get to the promised land. Dr. King's words, his faith in humanity, his hopes for the future, give us direction today as we continue to build our beloved community. But as John Lewis reminded us in his final essay before he died, democracy is not a state. It is an act, and each generation must do its part to help build what we call the beloved community, a nation and a world society at peace with itself. As we remember Dr. King today, let us commit to picking up the mantle and doing our part to build the beloved community together. Let us remain vigilant against this current backlash and those yet to come. Let us commit together to achieving the promised land that Dr. King knew he would never reach, but he knew we would achieve it. Let's make sure that we see it together. And so, Madam President, I move that when we adjourn today, we do so in honor and memory of the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King.
I thank the Senator.